Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Underneath the Hood. I'm Dave Martin, the owner of Martin's Auto Repair in Central Phoenix.
I'm Glen Hayward, the proud owner of Goodworks Auto Repair in sunny Tempe, Arizona.
And I'm Lee Weatherby with Accurate Automotive in the heart of Mesa.
And together, we represent 140 years of combined automotive experience.
Our goal is to change the perception of our auto repair industry by going behind the scenes and underneath the hood.
And we hope to share with you what it's like to own a small business and give you a perspective from an insider's point of view.
So let's get started. Good morning to another episode of Underneath the Hood podcast with Dave, Lee, and Glenn. See how I did that? I put my name first this time because you know what? I've always put you guys first.
Big loud noise? Dave slapped me, man.
I was being wrong. Selfless up until now. Now I decided,
Dave,
I'm putting myself first.
One thing we've known, one thing I've always known about you are a selfless man. That's good.
Hey, I am a giver.
You are a giver.
I am
You're
a giver.
a giver, brother.
Hey, and you know what? How you doing there, Glenn?
I am doing fraudulently wonderful.
Fraudulently wonderful. That sounds criminal.
That does sound criminal.
It does sound criminal.
I was thinking,
I mean,
boy,
I'm thinking,
that's adjectives I may not have used.
I don't know if we can. I think we need to edit that one out
Oh,
because, otherwise we
Okay.
might have the cops here. So what do you got for us today?
Dude, I got a wonderful little thing here, and it's called Someone's Car Discovery that was introduced way back when. So, in 1947, on June the 10th,
Today.
Saab
Oh, wow.
introduced an incredible vehicle that was very, very unique, and really was only present in motorcycles prior to this. It was a three-cylinder, two-stroke engine.
Wow.
Okay, so 3 cylinders, incredibly economical. But now, for those of you who don't know what two-stroke motors require, you have to mix oil with the gasoline
Right.
in a certain ratio depending on the type of vehicle. Like I had motorcycles when I was a kid.
What was the name of the car, though?
It was called the three-cylinder Model 92.
Model 92.
Model 92. So
Wow.
I don't know if they
Have you ever seen one?
Yes.
Have you really?
Actually, I worked for a guy when I got out of high school. I worked at a machine shop my brother worked for, and I took, wood shop, auto shop, machine shop.
Yeah, it was back in the day when they had that stuff there.
Yeah, so I thought it would be, yeah. And they're reintroducing it back into, the school system.
That's awesome.
Because
So when he was in high school in 1917.
Yeah, well, I knew that, but I didn't want to bring that up.
Oddly enough, the trades are coming back.
And that's a good thing.
It's a good thing.
There's a good thing. We
Yeah.
definitely need more infrastructure jobs and more people in it. And and that's a side note yet. So you actually has seen one of these vehicles?
This guy, his name was Woodrow Brixius. We called him Woody. He was a Swedish guy, obviously, the Woodrow Brixius. I mean, that's about as Swedish as you can get, right? So Woody had like 50 Saab vehicles. He had this huge warehouse that was apart from his machine shop, which is full of Warner, Swayze, machinery and stuff like that, Posilux, and we actually built a lot of the parts. I grew up in Milwaukee, so Harley Davidson was 5 miles from where I grew up.
Wow.
So Woodrow Brixius produced a lot of the side covers, which leaked really bad, but it was a design. It wasn't because we didn't build them right. The problem was that the enormous, massive size of these side covers, and they were aluminum, so they would move all over the place and start leaking. So off of that sidebar, but so Woody had a whole bunch of these cars, and he had several of these Model 3s, which were rare because this was in the early 1970s, but he had this collection of like 50 Saabs, and he wouldn't drive anything else. He wouldn't touch a Volvo, even though it's another Swedish vehicle. He was strictly Saab, and that was really cool. And some of his supervisors and stuff would drive his cars, but he was a collector of Saab vehicles.
Wow.
I've always thought Saab was an aeronautical company. You know what I mean?
An aeronautical? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I thought they had done something prior to that too. 'Cause
They're into a lot of things. It's like
They were.
Hyundai and everything else.
Yeah,
They're into all kinds of
Saab
stuff.
no longer exists. I mean, they quit manufacturing at least cars and selling them in the United States probably about 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah, because GM bought them, right?
I think GM was partnered with them
They were
for a
swapping
while.
split with them for what we call a
Yeah,
swapping
but I think
split for
Lockheed
a
Martin
long
bought
time.
them.
Yeah.
Lockheed Martin, I think, eventually bought them.
Oh, is that right?
I don't
okay.
know.
Yeah.
I think that's what happened.
Yeah. And my producer pulled up one of those Saabs on there.
Yeah, it looks like a Datsun B210.
Yeah, it looks, it looks like a big bubble is what
Yeah,
it looks
it
like. Yeah,
does.
it's kind of funny. Yeah.
But they did have they had some really cool looking models too. But
You know, the interesting thing is it's all innovative stuff. You know what I mean? It's just like, you look back in the 40s, I think that was at 47 or something. 49, you had the Tucker Turret. If you've ever seen the Tucker.
Had 3 headlights and the headlight turned with the steering wheel.
Yeah. And there was
seat belts, some really huge innovations.
Really
a lot of people said that
stuff.
that Saab looked like a plane without wings.
Well, and you know what?
Because remember back in the day, the planes looked like that too.
Absolutely.
They were like a big bubble.
Big bubbles.
Yeah, big bubbles. Yeah. Well, guys, you know what?
I like it when they have big bubbles.
There we go.
We are we're
In the heart of summer is where we are.
we're in we're in the heart of summer. Good point. But you know what? We were talking on one of the other podcasts about good, better, best for oil changes. Now, we kind of switch gears a little bit here, and we want to talk about good, better, best for cooling system.
Oh, I think it's vital.
Yeah, because this is a great time of the year to bring this up and to let our listeners know kind of the ins and outs of the cooling system and kind of the things that we should be doing and how we should proceed to basically keep from having catastrophic breakdowns.
And I know that Glen's going to give us some insight, but there's something that you just triggered something that Glen had brought up in a previous podcast some time back, and it was sediment. When you said dirt and deposit, you had said something about a sediment in the cooling system. You know what I mean, especially with particularly the orientation of the radiators and the such. At any rate. We'll get into that and talk about that because it's vital. The reason why coolant is plays such a vital role in the cars. What's its specific design? Cool the engine. You know what I mean? That's its really
Keep heat and friction down.
Keep heat and friction down,
Yep.
and then cool the engine, and then do what?
Supplies heat to the heaters.
There we go. There we go. It serves, you know what I mean, as a
several purposes. Yep.
As a creature comfort tool.
Right.
You know what I mean? Us being the creatures.
Right, and creature comfort, and also basically keeping underneath that hood, keeping things cool.
Absolutely.
Because I mean
Absolutely.
that's where friction and heat destroy things, right, guys?
No question. No question.
Overheated engines cost consumers more money than any singular failure, and that's an absolute fact.
Yeah, and I don't think people really always understand. All right, if you and I saw a big presentation on this, thought it was lovely, but when water is boiling on the stove, it boils at a specific tipping point. That tipping point is 212. Okay, it won't boil at 211. You know what I mean? It won't boil at 209, won't boil at 210. It'll start to bubble only when it reaches 212. The cars today, you know what I mean, are operating what we call normal operating temperature, okay, at about 218 to 220. Yep. And the funny thing is, that means the cars would be overheating if they were open air. See, when you're in open air or on a stove,
put it under pressure, it don't boil.
Yeah, there's no containment.
The pressure cooker.
As soon as you contain it and pressurize it, you know what I mean? Now, that new boiling point is somewhere around 251. You know what I mean? So that's when you're starting to boil. So when your temperatures are starting to get into the 230s, 240s, that's when we got to start going, whoa, no, this is no good.
Well, and I think one of the things Glenn alluded to was too is when what you said about put a lid on that pan while it's boiling. You got so much pressure.
Yep.
When that heat expands, cold contracts, right?
Right.
We all know this, right?
Yep.
And so what happens is what you said, and what Glenn was alluding to was that when the thing starts to get hot, everything expands.
You bet.
Well, and that is not necessarily good for gaskets and seals.
Nope.
Right?
It's not even good for the plastics and the radiators. I mean,
that too.
Or the plastic reservoirs where you add coolant. I mean, so many companies now, gosh, for the past at least 20 years or so, have put a plastic reservoir on the side, and some of them have the pressure cap on it.
And in some cases, they call those expansion tanks.
Yeah, it's an expansion tank.
Yeah.
But there's some that are kind of innocuous and they just have a little plastic cover on them. But many of them now contain the actual pressure cap.
Yeah. Right.
So people go, they don't see anything in there.
Yeah.
Right? So they grab the thing, the pressure cap, and they pull it off, and all of a sudden, boom, this hot, molten, exploding coolant starts spraying all over them and their engine. I mean, I don't. Who cares about the engine? It's spraying all over their face and their
birds.
And even though I think that this is probably a pretty well-known fact, I think it's probably something we should reiterate. never, 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 never open a contained system when the vehicle is hot or after it's been run. And it doesn't have to be overheating.
Exactly.
It does
That's
not
the
have to
point.
be overheating.
No.
It just, if you've run the vehicle for 5 minutes or more, you do not want to pull that cap because it can build pressure that fast and does in most cases. That's what it's designed to do.
Well, and the best time, so let's pass this on to our listeners. The best time to check your cooling system is first thing in the morning. before you start the car.
Absolutely.
It's the first time. It's the
Before
safest.
start.
It's
Before the
safest.
first start.
Or if
It's
it
the-
hasn't run for an hour or two.
But it's the
Yeah.
safest. It's
But it is the
time
safest time,
because
no
that way you don't run the risk of
Right.
having anything.
No
You know,
question.
back in the service station days, that's how where I started. You would get people that would come in, and they would, the car was getting hot, and inevitably you'd watch them. They go out there and they lift their own hood
Yep.
and they turn that cap, and next thing you know, it was a geyser.
Yep.
We even had the canopy. I don't know. It was probably 18 feet in the air. We had a client one time came in there and released that cap, and it hit the bottom of the canopy.
Did it burn them?
Oh, yeah. it burned.
See, the problem is that's like molten lava coming out of there.
Yeah,
and when
it's
it
bad,
gets
yeah.
on your skin,
Yeah.
it won't let go. It's not like it's water; it just washes off because it's got the glycol and all that stuff mixed in with it. And boy, it sticks, and you'll get second, third degree burns just that fast.
Oh.
And back,
Never remove
Back in the
those
day when
pressure
the
caps.
radiators
Never.
were first installed on vehicles and so on, the caps didn't have a spring-loaded rubberized
No.
plunger on them
Right.
like they do now. But that
Right.
came in probably in the 1930s or something. But it was just a
Yeah, you take it off
a
and it
cap
goes, yep.
and just a flat piece of rubber on there, and man, you just start to listen to that thing, it would blow off like a geyser.
Well,
At
and
least the spring gives you a quarter of a turn before it starts to let some.
But then
of
you
the
got to be
pressure-
careful with
It's
that
still
too.
dangerous. It's
Yeah,
still dangerous.
Right, you got to be careful with that too, because even if
It's
you
just
turn it a
less
quarter and
dangerous.
it starts to run out and you don't have a rag or anything there,
Oh, no.
you're burning your hand.
You're burning your hand.
So
Well, and
Turn and
every,
burn, baby.
Even literally put your
Run.
palm down. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
this is kind of the rule of thumb. You put your palm down and twist it because you don't want to be grabbing on. But I mean, you're going to feel the heat. The one thing I would tell our listeners, and I hope this is helpful, but the way you can actually really tell whether or not you can release that cap is grab onto the radiator hose, right? Grab onto the radiator hose. If the radiator hose is relaxed, and you know what a relaxed hose feels like, you can usually squeeze through it without too much ado. You can feel whether it's hot or cold to the touch. Generally, the upper radiator hose is going to, be the easiest access point. But if there's pressure in it, if it feels bulged and pressurized, don't take the cap off. That's an absolute telltale sign that it's under pressure. Do not take that cap off. If it's squeezed together, or if it's if it's very easy,
Yeah.
you know what I mean, to manipulate.
It's soft. If
It's
it's
soft.
softer, yeah.
You're and make sure. I mean, because long story short, man, if it's hot at all, even if it's hot to the touch, please be careful. You know what I mean? 'Cause-
And you got to be a little careful with that too, because what happens when the thermostat sticks shut? One of the hoses is hot, one of the hoses are cold.
could be.
It could be. So you got to be a little careful there too. And you brought this up in another podcast that we had talked about, and I think it was about keeping things clean. Well, one of the things that the consumer can do is make sure that there's no debris on the front of their vehicle.
Absolutely.
Because airflow is the most underrated thing that people look for when they have an overheating problem.
Absolutely.
We've ran in and we racked our brains out on this one car, and this was probably 10, 15 years ago. This car would overheat.
Yeah.
And we did it. We tried everything. We were going nuts trying to figure it out. Well, on this particular vehicle, it had an air dam on the bottom. And what happened was they removed it because the car had been in a minor accident, and in the body shop that did it, or they did it in their backyard. I don't remember. But
The part was expensive.
The part was expensive, and they didn't put that air dam back on. And guess what happened? Now they
didn't give a damn.
Yeah, they didn't give a damn. So something simple like that
An air
can
dam,
make
that
all
is.
the difference in the world. And and that's so the airflow. To your point there, when you brought up cleaning it, clean off the front. Certain times of year we get the bugs, right? And you're driving. If you drive to Casa Grande, let's say, or go to Tucson, by the time you get back, the whole front of your car is covered with dead bugs, right? And they're all
Absolutely.
stuck in the radiator.
And you see them when you do the washing. But remember how many of those snuck past what you can see.
Yeah, absolutely. So you lift the hood and you got to get in there and kind of clean all that stuff
bet.
off.
You bet.
And definitely, I always tell this as a disclaimer: make sure you consult with your shop
You bet.
before you start doing stuff like that. Just to ask them to make sure that there's nothing that you could be doing any kind of a damage to, or anything that's not supposed to get wet doesn't get wet. So I would definitely do that. But it definitely, airflow is such a huge thing.
Oh, Oh, it is. There's no question.
Well, it's not just the radiator.
Yeah.
Now there's transmission coolers and
absolutely.
there's condensers for the air conditioning system that sit in front of the radiator.
In front of the radiators,
Yeah,
right?
the AC doesn't work very well when the condenser gets hot.
Yeah.
That is
Or even when they get obstructed. Because like you're talking about, in the roads that we drive on out here, let's face it, there's always road construction. You know what I mean? I don't care what month of the year, it is.
Yeah, there's always everywhere you go.
And listen, that's a blessing and a curse. You know what I mean? All in one. I mean, we've got pretty good roads. I'm not going to complain. It's just that sometimes traffic is always contained, or you hit bumps and burrs. But there's always road construction, dirt, debris, deposits, rocks. You know what I mean? That's why we have so many windshields that go down. But the key to it is all of that stuff collects. You know what I mean? And we've just got to, like you say, make sure that we get that, because airflow, it is one of the key components to help keeping things cool. And people think, well, how can 128 degree air, outside keep my car cool when I'm going?
It makes a world of difference.
Oh my goodness, a huge difference. And if you could just, if you understood how the process works, because that's what those fans do, is they draw the air through. And so to your point, when you start stacking things in front of the other, you know what I mean? You want to try to test a car. I mean, one of the things we used to do is we wanted to find out how the fans are working. We'd put cardboard up in front. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
Now you're stopping
piece
all
of
airflow.
paper, sieve it, suck it in.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, because the fan clutches on them, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that brings up a really good segue here for us, is that, and Glenn, I want you to kind of explain this. Don't get too technical with it, because I want people to understand this.
I might confuse you.
Yeah, well, you confuse me for sure. You confuse me every time I talk to you. So, and it doesn't matter what the subject is. So one of our listeners asked, "What are the parts of a cooling system?"
Oh, wow, great
What
question.
are the parts of the cooling system?
That's a great question.
And kind of give our listeners an idea of how a cooling system is really designed and works without getting crazy technical.
Okay. Well, obviously you have the radiator that's in front of the engine. It's got hoses attached to it. And there's a pump in every car, whether it's an electric pump on some vehicles. And some of the German vehicles, they use an electric pump. And it's external. It's not even on the engine itself, and it circulates the coolant. Now, that's kind of antiquated technology. Everyone's put them on the front of the engine or somewhere on the side of the engine where it can actually circulate. So you got to circulate that coolant, because hot water boiling or hot coolant boiling in one place is not going to, it's going to keep getting hotter. So something has to circulate that. So this pump, it looks like a little pinwheel inside of your engine, and it spins around driven by a belt typically. And it circulates the coolant through the engine block, which gets super, super hot. It's where all the heat comes from, is for the combustion, the engine exploding gasoline inside of it and getting hot, right? So something has to, move that stuff, get it through the radiator, where the cooling fans, whether it's a mechanical fan or an electric fan or two, and some people even put a supplemental one on there on older vehicles with the type of radiators that don't like heat, and they add some air conditioning stuff that wasn't originally on the vehicle. Yeah. So you got to have enough cooling to displace that heat that's coming through the radiator. And different radiators, now they've changed designs. I think we talked about that in another episode. Radiators used to be made out of brass. Brass was a great material. It
dissipates heat fast.
Yeah, it would dissipate heat fast, and but it became very expensive, number one, and they're heavy as heck. A brass radiator could weigh 50 to 100 pounds in trucks and stuff like that, and in semi-trucks, they're 200-300 pounds. So they decided, this is heavy, it's excess weight on the drag strip, let's make it out of lighter material. So they started making them out of aluminum. The advantage of aluminum is it can displace heat faster. In other words, it can get rid of heat faster than brass could. Brass would stay hot. The metal would stay hot because it had to be thicker. Aluminum, they made very thin.
And I don't want to stop you on your point. I want to ask one thing real quick,
yes,
just for our audience. Going into a simple cycle, so you said we start with the radiator, we go through the hoses, we go into the block, you know what I mean? And the system is a closed system. It's a recycling system.
Correct.
I call it a reciprocating system. What is that one component it's got to go through to make it reciprocate?
It's called a thermostat.
Yeah.
The thermostat controls the flow of because they want to keep these engines running at a certain temperature.
There we go.
And the newer the car is, the higher temperatures they're running at. I mean, they have some that are running at 230 degrees internally.
Right.
You think, well, that's beyond the boiling point. Why isn't the radiator cap blowing off? Well, believe
Contained
me,
system.
they've got ways of doing this technologically to make it work and not blow the top off your radiator.
And so why do we want to keep, I mean, and this is the big key, because I hope people understand it, because you've explained it really well. And now I want them to get it kind of an imagery picture. You got radiator fluid that's in the radiator, and then you got radiator fluid that's in the engine block, and it's being regulated by the thermostat. Why? Which one's hot and which one's cold?
Well, obviously the engine side is hotter, but at some point it's got to get out of that hot engine and make its way to the front where it can get cooled in the radiator.
And it kind of does the trade-off, doesn't it? The thermostat opens and it goes like this,
Yep.
and then as soon as, why does the thermostat close? Because it all of a sudden starts to feel hot coming back in.
Right. Well, it has to spend enough time in the radiator to cool the
Bingo.
coolant down sufficiently to make sure when it goes back into the engine, it maintains a specific temperature.
A base temperature.
A base temperature.
And that's basically, and I don't mean to interrupt you there, Glenn, but that's also back to the airflow thing.
Right.
What cools off the radiator?
Yeah.
Airflow, right?
Airflow. All airflow.
So you got a series of things. You have fans, you have ducts that are actually in the front and the bumpers and everything else like that. And a lot of times when people do work on their vehicles, they remove some of those ducts. They think, oh, it's just like excess weight. No, it's not. It's actually directing that air to go
Bingo.
into the radiator and the condenser that's in front of it and the transmission cooler, which all sit in front of there. Those things aren't getting cooled at all. So now you're over-temping your transmission. Your transmission now on most cars have a light that says transmission too hot, temperature too hot, especially on trucks, right? And a lot of times that's due to the fact that people aren't servicing their fluids, or some of that stuff has been removed. If someone puts a custom grill or a custom something on their truck and they remove some of the factory stuff that was on there, and now they've created another problem.
Now they got to be in the be careful zone, because it's exactly like you're saying. Airflow, obstruction, all the things, the diversions that aren't there. You know what I mean?
Something simple, getting into a little minor fender bender.
Absolutely.
People don't realize that when you get in a minor fender bender, you start moving stuff around the front end. Now you change the whole direction of the airflow, and then you wonder why you started having an overheat problem.
And some of those things are hidden, because you know what? You might get into a fender bender and it pushes something on the inside. So now you have your AC condenser touching your radiator, and even though it's not leaking fluid, it's getting hot. You don't really understand, because that condenser gets hotter than a hornet.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? When the
I
AC's
got to add
on,
one more thing to this, because now, for the last probably 10 years, the engines weren't getting as hot as they want them to be, because the cooling systems became so efficient that they put louvers on the front grille.
Yes, they
and
did.
they're electronically controlled.
Yeah, that's
And they
and
open
and they're
and close
expensive as
because
all
they
get
want-
out.
They want that motor to run at a hotter temperature. So in the cooler weather, those louvers shut. It's like blinders on your windows.
right.
Okay?
Yeah.
Back east, it's a different ball game, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so
It's-
cars, even here in Arizona, these cars, those louvers open and close. And guess what? It'll turn the check engine light on.
No, they will. Absolutely. Yeah.
What's my car in for?
and-
Well, your louvers aren't working. The blinds on your, and to explain this, they think you're screwing them. They think you're lying to them. No, you have louvers that open and close on your grill, and they're not working. The motor is froze up. And unfortunately, you can't replace the motors. You have to replace the entire assembly, and it's kind of pricey.
Yeah, a lot of things are
Well,
sold.
could you just do without it? No, not unless you want the check engine light to go off.
A lot of things are sold in assemblies now.
Yeah,
the
most
quick
things
the
are.
quick thing that I'd love to kind of discuss in this, because we were talking about good, better, best as far as the coolants go.
Right.
In oil, I mean, I recall that we had talked a couple different things about oil and some of the additives you can do. Cooling systems are very similar, you know what I mean? Except it is now more vital than ever. And I really want our audience to understand this. It is really hard to make sure that you're using the exact correct coolant when you do decide to do a service on the cooling system. All right. Now, I know in a previous podcast, you talked about 2 to 3 years. I'm in full agreement. I don't think you go any more than 50,000 miles without servicing the cooling system. You know what I mean? If that's 2, 3, 4 years, great, whatever that is. However, when you do decide to replace that coolant and clear it all out, it's got to be so specific. No longer is it okay. One size does not fit all, guys. Even though, and I know we get a lot of customers that come in and they say, well, we went to AutoZone, or we wanted to go to AutoZone, and we saw that this coolant, cost this and this coolant, and it says it works. You guys, does every coolant work in every car?
Well, no, and because the metals and all the things that they're doing,
It'll work for a while.
All the things
For a while.
all the
I
things
gotta say, yes, it will
the metals have
for a
changed.
while.
There's plastics. There's all kinds of things, and you put the wrong coolant in there, it can cause corrosion. It can cause all kinds of other issues.
Runnability issues.
Well, even chemical. I mean, there's certain chemicals don't mix with other chemicals. So the chemical formulations
Just ask GM about
in
this.
these things, it will start to actually eat up your plastic components if you don't have the right stuff on there. And you wonder, well, how come they put in all those plastic? Well, I don't know. We have no control over that, right? Why are the manufacturers in plastic? Because it's cheap. That's why.
But here's the interesting thing. Even though, and that's actually kind of a great point. Even though the manufacturers have used, let's call it a less expensive product, you know what I mean, to try to contain costs, they still have given us as the consumer the opportunity.
Doesn't contain it at the consumer level.
Well, it does. That's what I'm saying. Now we get to take control.
Right.
That's the beautiful part. We get to take control because now, if we play, dumb and put our head in the sand and say, I'm never going to change this. I've never really had this problem. That's misleading even to themselves because they know they've had to replace hoses and they know they've had to replace thermostats and they know they've had to replace water pumps. You know what I mean? All pertaining to the cooling system. And did those things wear out because they got more rust on them? Did those things wear out because externally they failed? No, everything wears out from the inside, just like, people and everything else. So the reality of it is, I mean,
I've seen some pretty beat up looking old faces. But
there you go.
I'd hate to see the inside.
You know what that means? That means good living. But I mean, that's the same thing with cars.
We're doing the wrong thing, living hard. Yeah. Whoa, yeah.
I always thought that was good living.
Yeah, good living.
Well, there's a saying, I think my grandfather, what you put into your body is what you get out of it.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that in comparison to cars too. What you put in is what you're going to get out.
Right.
And I agree with that. I do.
And all the fluids and we know this with transmission, we know this with oil, we know this with differential. If you don't put the correct fluids in the vehicle, you will definitely have problems.
How many times we
had a car come in a shop, and this is totally off topic, but I'm going to throw this in there just real quick just to make the point, is that we had a car come in the shop about a year ago, and the customer did not have a problem with the transmission until they went and had it serviced. What they did was they didn't realize that particular vehicle needed a really special fluid, and you had to get it from Ford. You had to, and you had to buy the right fluid.
Mercon LX.
Yeah, because if you didn't, it causes a shifting problem.
Absolutely.
Causes a shifting problem.
Absolutely.
So you want to make everything is so specific now. It's not like when we ran a business where we had
two kinds of fluid.
Yeah, two kinds of fluids. And
bulk. You know what I mean? Remember we used to have bulk.
Yeah,
you know
right.
What I mean?
And now you could fill a whole wall full of fluids.
Just transmission fluid.
That's almost.
And that was my point.
7, 8, 9. There's 10 speeds out there. I mean, and they all take a specific, and they won't. Though they will not work right.
But to the exact point that we're talking about, and this is why I think this topic is so vital. To the average consumer, they don't come in and see our shelves where they see a whole wall of coolant, whereas we used to dedicate one quadrant. Now we have a whole wall. Because let's face it, even one brand, let's use Chrysler for an example. All right. They've got 5-year coolant and then they've got their 10-year coolant, right?
Or lifetime.
Yeah. But the key to it is there's a drastic cost difference in the 5 to the 10. And there's also a drastic color difference. All right. But at the same token, if you put the wrong one, all right, let's say you put the 5-year in the 10. Will it work? Well, just like Glen says, it's going to drive out of there. It's going to be fine. But you know what? You're going to get all that corrosion and stuff like that. That'll happen usually within the first, year, maybe year and a half to 2. And then the next thing you know, why did my water pump fail? Why did I have this? Why am I having a thermostat stuck? Why does the car idle higher?
I call it chemical warfare.
Yeah.
Well,
seriously, the chemicals do not
engage.
With these.
They start to act on the plastics and the other components, you know what I mean? The seals, the rubber gaskets, things like that we don't see that are on the inside.
Well, and when you do your inventory, what is the most inventory you carry as far as inventory? What is it? It's in my shop. It's fluids.
It is.
It's
mine
fluids.
as well.
It's fluids.
Oil.
Transmission fluids, engine oil. Think about power steering fluid. How many different ones are there?
Right.
Pitocin and then Honda and then come on, you guys.
Yeah, no, it's insane.
It is.
Well, and hey, we got another. We're going to wrap this thing up here in a little bit, but we got another question.
Okay.
If you're driving down the road and you start to see your temperature gauge start to climb up, what should you do?
Okay, I'll tell you. That's for me. This is about the biggest no-brainer there is. If I see my temperature gauge, I'm never going to let it get over 3/4 ever. You know what I mean? And if I see it and I'm astute and looking at it, you know what I mean? Because now all of a sudden I'm alerted, I'm going to pull over. You know what I mean? I'm going to pull over and I'm going to let it cool down. Because here's the thing, just like I was talking about at a different podcast, but sometimes you hear the same things. A cop pulls you over and says, how many drinks you have? Oh, the thing he hears most of the time, oh, I had a couple. Well, you know, whenever we get people that overheated a car.
Sounds like you're speaking from experience, Lee.
My dad was a cop.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I mean, when people come in after it's been overheated, well, how far did you drive? Well, I only had a mile to go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The thing of it is, you don't have a mile to go. So at 3/4, you don't have a mile to go. So you shut her down. Then you let it cool down. Now, after I've let it cool down for a period, I mean, what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to check my fluid levels. I'm not going to pull that cap to do it. I'm going to check my reservoir. I'm going to take a look at that. I do want to pull the hood. Now, please hear me. When I say pull the hood, I don't mean walk out and open up the hood. That invites an explosion. People got to understand. I mean, pull the hood and let it pop. Let some of that heat exhaust out of the hood from the little crack that you get. Not go through, because if there's a problem underneath the hood, introducing that extra surge of air.
And you need the Underneath the Hood podcast
can create.
to help
Yeah.
Well, and one of the things I want to clarify there, what you said a minute ago, is about looking in the bottle. We had a car in a shop last week where the bottle was full, the radiator was empty.
Yeah.
And it kind of tricked my guy for a little bit.
Bad cap.
Yeah. And so the thing of it is that system has to be a closed system in order for that to work correctly, like you guys had said earlier. And so the thing it can fool you when you look in that bottle. You go, God, I got plenty of coolant in here. Why is the car getting hot? Well, like Lee said, you got to let it cool down first. But there's one thing that I want to say, and I tell a lot of my clients this too. If you're driving down the road, you want to pull over to a safe spot.
Absolutely.
You don't want to get yourself in a situation where you're stuck on the side of the road where somebody could take you out.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Agreed.
So one of the first things I tell them to try is flip the heater on.
Yeah.
And is what you're doing is essentially you've got a miniature radiator in your dash.
Yeah.
And when you turn that heater on,
Yeah.
it's blowing air through that heater core,
Right.
and that'll help cool down the
A third
coolant.
fan.
Yeah, a third fan. It'll help cool that system down just a little bit, and may keep it from getting to that tipping point where it gets to the red.
Right.
We want to keep it out of the red, right? We want to get it to between half. We don't keep right at half.
Right.
But like you said, when it gets to 3/4, we don't want it to go any higher. So
It's not far to the
right,
end.
right. And I tell people, I know it's the middle of summer, it's 115. The last thing you want to do is blast yourself with heat, but
Yeah, but it's going to get them to pull over.
get you to pull over into a
Yeah,
safe
it's
spot.
going to get you to pull
Yeah,
over because
yeah.
nobody wants to be driving around with the heat on.
I'm going to reverse engineer the question. What is besides running your car out of oil, what is the most damaging, most expensive repair cost that you can do to your car by
Great question. Glenn.
neglecting it?
Yeah, the cooling system. Run it out of coolant.
Overheat it.
Yeah, overheat it.
And here's another problem, though. On a lot of the expensive Euro cars, there's no temperature gauge neither.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, the light.
They do have to have a light. They've
They
got
have
a
a
light or
light.
a message center.
They have a light, but if you're not paying attention, a lot of you thinking,
Yeah, if you're not paying attention, then
or
your
you- or
driver
you're thinking-
error.
or you
Hold
think
on,
it's not that
Glenn,
important
Glenn,
because you're not seeing
there's no getting around the fact that as a driver of a vehicle, you have an onus of responsibility to yourself and everyone else on the road. And you just said something that's concerning, and that's why I'm not letting it go. You're not paying attention. What are you doing behind the wheel?
You know,
What are you doing behind the wheel?
That's why we call them idiot
Well,
lights.
but what I'm saying is, so they
I
don't.
understand what you're saying. I get what you're saying,
They don't
Lee.
give you a gauge.
Yeah.
But they do give you a signal, and the key to it is,
But-
why are we? Why?
But is
do
a
they give you-
signal warning or is it an emergency? That's where people get screwed up. Well, I saw the light come on, but I didn't think I thought I could make it to,
Well, then, like Lee said, I just went a mile.
should shut the car. I
You
mean,
know, and you didn't go a mile.
to me,
No, you didn't go.
To me, it should disable the car from running normally, where you have to pull it over. I realize that could be dangerous if you're in a high speed.
Yeah, you're on the
lane.
freeway. That's not a good idea.
I
But
know.
I get what you're saying.
But
I
they
get-
should,
yeah.
sue the pants off the manufacturer if they made the car
Oh,
shut
they would.
off. Or, you
They
know.
would.
But the point is, people essentially are stupid.
I
and when it
wouldn't go
comes
that
to their
far.
vehicles and ignoring lights and
Let's back up.
not everybody,
Yeah, but let's
but
back up
many
here.
drivers, they make the big mistake. I'll just try to make it.
So let me, and it's okay that we can agree to disagree. But let me back up. I don't take the stance that people are generally stupid or about those kinds of things. I don't. Uneducated to some degree.
I'll say ignorant.
Ignorant, okay,
stupid.
or
I'll
uneducated to
replace
some of
that.
the things, yes. But the real reality of it is, okay, hot is hot. And that means that when you start, if you're alerted, and I think that was a question, when you're alerted, you know what I mean, that there's something that may be going on, then now be super vigilant, all right, in just following through. Because everything we do in this world, guys, is always about follow through. So now if you just keep your eyes, glancing down, I'm not saying take it off and don't pay attention to the road. That's not what I'm saying. But as a driver, we all know that we've got an opportunity to check our message center, whether it's a gauge or whether it's a light or something like that. And if that thing starts to alert us, boy, I'm getting hotter, or it says I'm hot, get to a safe spot. Just exactly like you said, pull over, and then now let's do some investigative stuff before we got to go get to that meeting or before we try to push it. Because here's the thing. We might take a $4 problem and turn it into a $4,000 problem.
Right. And
that's the bill problem.
Well, and what you said, Lee, and I'll back this up a little bit here too. The thing of it is everybody's so busy. Life is busy.
Absolutely.
We all got a million things going on in our head.
Absolutely.
I mean, how many times you get in your car and you're like, oh my God, you're thinking about all these things and you're thinking, I just drove past the street I need to turn on.
Yeah.
Because we're all so busy and we're all so in our frame of mind of thinking of other things. So we don't always pay attention to a lot of the things. And that's where a good shop, somebody with a great relationship, build that relationship and cultivate that relationship. And they'll keep your car going to where they'll minimize your chances of having that problem.
Bingo.
And so
that's the value of the relationship.
Right, that's the value of the relationship. So let's wrap this thing up and why don't you give us some wisdom here, Lee?
You know what? I kind of like this one. Now, this was definitely from our producer, and I think this was kind of a fun. It was from Irma Bombeck, who I was listed as.
Wow, that's a name blast from the past. I haven't heard that name in ever.
I say that's from like the 80s, right? She was listed as an American humorist. It says, "Never lend your car to anyone to whom you have given birth."
You know what? I agree with her on that one.
There we go.
I mean, I totally agree with her. Yeah. It's when your daughter comes home and tells you she's got a small dent in her car and you look at the whole side of the car and it's caved in. You're like, that's a small dent to you? Really?
It makes me think of one of the commercials that you see on TV right now. The guy walks up and he goes, "What's black and white and it's got dents all over?" And he looks at his boss and he goes, "The work truck."
Yeah, that's funny. Well, guys, hey, it's been another great podcast, and I enjoy the heck out of this. I've had a lot of fun so far, and we'll do it again really soon. And I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your week, man.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Glen. Be good.
I'm looking forward to it. See ya.
See ya.